Shabbat shalom. 2 days ago, I was trying to get my daughter out of our kitchen and into the car. Those of you who have ever had young children know this dance very well. There is the battle first for the snow pants, and then for the boots, and then for the mitts. And do you put the jacket on en route to the car, knowing that, yes, you will absolutely have to take it off to get her into the seat? And which toy will come with you? And are you willing to let her take her toast? Or can you just finally admit to yourself that you lost that battle long ago, and that no amount of cleaning will ever get the crumbs out of your car? It is their home now. On this particular morning, as we were walking out the kitchen door, my daughter spinned 180 degrees, pointed to a salt bottle on our spice rack and said, "I want my bottle." And I said, "Sella, that's not your bottle. That's the salt." And she burst into tears, wailing, "No, no, no, that is my bottle, Abba, that is my bottle." At which point, my wife confirmed for me that, no, really, that is actually her bottle. She made it in school. It's not salt, it's sand. It has a little glass bead inside so that when you shake it, there's this very satisfying tactile auditory click. I handed my daughter the bottle. "I'm sorry, Sella. You were right. I was wrong. This is, in fact, your bottle." She smiled. The tears vanished, and the entire car ride to temple, even on the steps outside the playground, right over there, she sweetly repeated these words as she reminded me again and again, "Abba, you were wrong." People are not perfect. This should not surprise you. And people, especially in this case, include the great rabbis and the figures of our Torah. Genesis is filled with flawed people, the patriarchs and the matriarchs who make mistakes and hurt the people that they love. And I won't go so far as to say that Judaism doesn't have saints, it doesn't have flawless heroes, because the Hasidic world often reads our stories this way. And not only them, the rabbis of the Talmud also are adept at forgiving the wrongs and failures of our forebears, enhancing the text with midrash that beautifies the past and erases any flaw of character. But personally, I have always taken great strength, and I've gained a lot of faith in knowing that from reading our Torah, that our heroes are flawed, like us. They are human. They are people. People are not perfect, and yet they still do incredible things. They have powerful relationships with God. They remain worthy of memory. They remain worthy of praise. This week's Torah portion, Yitro, continues this tradition of not shying away from the human flaws and takes a deep look at Moses, both as a family man and as a community leader. And while its criticism is subtle, it is harsh. So I'm going to give a bit of context from previous in the book of Exodus that we need to look at this text with open eyes. Moses, when he flees Egypt, finds his way to Midian, and there he marries into the family of Yitro, or Jethro, the high priest. One of Jethro, Yitro's daughters, Tzipporah, starts a family with Moses. They have a son, Gershon. And after Moses speaks to God through the burning bush, he returns to his father-in-law's house and announces he must return to Egypt. Yitro sends him on his way in peace, and he, along with Tzipporah and the children, there's more than one now, saddle up and get on their way back to Egypt. Simultaneously, Aaron, Moses' brother, is told by God to go meet Moses in the wilderness on his way. And here is the blip. Once this happens, Moses' family is no longer mentioned. Are Tzipporah and the children with Moses in Egypt? Do they witness the signs and wonders? Do they cross the Red Sea at his side? This is unanswered for around 15 chapters of our Torah, when suddenly this week it comes roaring back at the beginning of this parsha. The Israelites are encamped near Mount Sinai, and Jethro, Yitro, having heard of the great goodness done by God for the Israelites, arrives, and with him is Tzipporah and Gershom and Moses' second previously unnamed son, Eliezer. The text then tells us that at some point, we don't know when, Moses had sent Zipporah away. Our rabbis comment in different ways, saying that Moses sent her back to Midian before they even arrived in Egypt because he was afraid that when they crossed the border, she would be enslaved. Now they are reunited. The Torah takes great pains to let us know that Zipporah is here, that the two sons are here. It gives us the meaning and etymology of their names in great detail, and then the Torah swerves and offers us something deeply unexpected. You can find it in Exodus 18:7. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed to him. He kissed him. They asked about each other's welfare. They went into a tent. It has been at least 2 months, but no more than a year since Moses has seen his family. And if you want to know about that math, find me downstairs. And after being explicitly told that his wife and children are here, the only conversation, the only relationship that the Torah lets us see is Moses with his father-in-law. And if you think to yourself for a moment, well, maybe that's how it was in the ancient world. That's how married couples were. There was not a public show of affection and reuniting. I might be able to accept it. But if you also think that this is how parents and children interacted in the ancient world, I would encourage you to look to the story of Jacob and Joseph and their tearful reunion at the end of Exodus, or the tragic story of Yiftach and his daughter in the book of Judges as another. When children and parents are separated from one another after a time of great danger, the Torah never shies away from telling us that they reunite in love. And when the Torah tells us how methodical Moses is in welcoming his father-in-law, but no one else, it is trying to teach us something. That the Torah does not extend the same emotional courtesy to Moses' family is a lesson about where Moses' priorities are at this time. And while the Torah is not explicit, the implication is that he has misplaced them. This is confirmed in the very next line of the Torah, where we find out that Moses has been overworking himself. He refused to delegate authority. He has heard each case of injustice in his nation personally. He has made both himself and the people who seek his good counsel miserable with his inefficiency. And his father-in-law is not shy about saying, "This is not good. You will wither away, both you and your people. It is too heavy. You cannot do it alone." This is such a 1-2 punch. First, the text shows us that Moses put his priorities so deeply into his work and to his leadership that what should be this moment of joyful reunion between him and his sons, between a husband who loves his wife so much that he sends her away rather than risk anything happen to her, has instead become strained. And not only that, the sacrifice he made, it's not even worth it. Because the system that he's been killing himself to put into place, prioritizing it over his family, it doesn't even work. One could read this as an explicit critique of being a workaholic, a 3,000-year-old version of cats in the cradle. But there is another layer here. We are mere moments, a few scant lines in verse away from the Decalogue that we just read, the 10 Commandments. The Torah surprises us that rather than by basking in triumphalism, it decides to take the chapter beforehand to take our hero to task. You cannot get to a moment of eternal covenant without also reading about Moses' initial failure as a leader. It is, as I mentioned at the beginning, a reminder, a poignant one, that our text and our tradition do not want us to forget that the best of us, the very best of us, all of us, are flawed. we are not perfect. And hopefully it also shares that you do not need rose-colored glasses to remember sacred, holy, wonderful days. In fact, what the Torah seems to be saying is, put away that perspective entirely. See people as they are. Moses was not always the best father. And Moses was not always the best husband. And Moses was not always the best civil servant. Even Moses was not perfect. I'm going to struggle with the next part of this. I have a few living rabbinic heroes. One of them is named Arthur Green. Rabbi Green is the former president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, the founding dean of Hebrew College, one of the foremost scholars who writes in English on Hasidic literature. He is a giant of Neo-Hasidism. He is a thought partner in the creation of Renewal Judaism. He is one of the most respected liberal rabbis alive today. His influence is found in each major movement of Judaism that you find. I have read most of Rabbi Green's works. My rabbinic thesis, in fact, is about 3 of his most important books, and I have spoken with him many times over the years and been blessed to pick his brain. He even was kind enough before the pandemic to send me some of the things he was working on so that I could read them before they were published. His books are some of my go-tos for sermons, for personal study, and for my own internal growth. And his best-selling Judaism's 10 Ideas has made its way into the hands of each and every one of my conversion students. His words are literally some of the first I tell a person to read when they say, I want to join the Jewish people. I can go on and on. And this week, Rabbi Arthur Green is in the news for all of the wrong reasons. In a lengthy and in-depth profile in the Jewish Telegraph Agency, it was revealed that Rabbi Green's retirement 2 years ago was a forceful one, resulting from a sexual misconduct allegation, and that this week he has been banned from the premise of Hebrew College, the institute that he helped shape and elevate to its current status. Rabbi Green is not the first major rabbinical figure in the last decade to have faced this sort of allegation. The Reform movement is still working its way through its own internal reports about rabbis, some living and some dead, who were serial sexual abusers. HUC-JIR, the Reform Seminary, is still engaged in repairing relationships with generations of students after performing its own internal audit in response to decades of allegations of sexism and harassment and misconduct. In fact, in just a month at the CCAR conference, the Central Conference of American Rabbis will be offering new rabbinic documents to students who want a reprint, essentially a redo, if their abuser signed the document that made them a rabbi. And in fact, of course, most famously, there is the case of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, who was the voice of an entire generation of Jewish music, and following his death was accused multiple times of sexual assault. And while I know about all of these other cases, I must admit that none of those other cases affected me this way, because none of those other cases were Rabbi Arthur Green. None of them so personally touched my rabbinate in such a profound way. And so to hear this allegation this week was as if I was suffering a personal loss. According to Rabbi Green, following the death of his wife of 49 years in 2017, he thought he found a connection with a member of the faculty who had once been his student. And during a visit at his home, Green admits to kissing the other person, quote, in a way I shouldn't have, an expression of affection by a lonely older guy, not an assertion of power or a demand. But according to Hebrew College, Rabbi Green, quote, engaged in sexual misconduct that caused significant emotional harm to a member of our community, that there is a pattern of concerningly similar events, that he broke a confidentiality agreement he agreed to, and he failed to engage and complete the repentance the teshuvah process requested by the school. The Jewish press is now filled with competing claims between the school and the rabbi. Who did what, and when, and where, and how much, and more. And charges of belligerency and intransigence and unfair expectations and generational differences and backstage internal academic policies, they all swirl abound. And I'm not going to get into them because I want to make this explicitly clear that these are real people with real emotions and real trauma. And it is not for me to dissect their stories from the bima, to take a side, to play he said, they said. God forbid. No. My role instead, the reason why I'm bringing this element of Torah to us this morning, is to repeat that same refrain and that same linkage that I began with that was so evident in the reading of our Torah, to remind us that people are flawed and that people make mistakes and that rabbis are people and that nobody human, not even a great rabbi, not even a rabbi to rabbis, is above that. And I need to admit my own mistake here too. That it is not Rabbi Green's fault that I am so hurt by this conduct. It is my fault. Because I forgot that very vital lesson. I held him to a standard that the Torah warned me not to. And I placed him on a pedestal. And now that that pedestal is broken, I need to figure out what comes next in my relationship to his work. It would be nice if every mistake was as easy to solve as handing a child their misidentified toy and saying, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." Even if that means you have to endure being reminded of it nonstop for the rest of the day. But the reality of our world is that we have not yet determined what a proper process of repentance looks like. It is, in fact, one of the most major disagreements that we have as a society today. It is front and center in the dreaded culture wars. Is it enough to say sorry privately? Or is there a public apology needed? Are words enough? Or does there need to be education and reparative action? Should penalties and punishment factor in? Or does that perpetuate a cycle? Does that stymie self-growth, the ability to admit our flaws? I actually don't have answers to that question other than to say that it's actually not a new question. In the Talmud, and later in the Mishnah, Torah, our rabbis describe 5 kinds of damage which must be repaired when a person hurts their fellow. And for more than 1,000 years, Jewish law and culture have acknowledged that repentance between human beings is not actually as simple as we hope. And yet, in all of these law texts, and in these thousands of years of conversations, in all of the minutiae, never once is it assumed that a person will go through their entire life and never be in conflict with another. It is never assumed that you will never wrong another. And it is also never assumed that you will never forgive another. Because both wronging and forgiving are a fact of life. We are human, and not a one of us, from the greatest to the least, is perfect. And neither our tradition, our history, our Torah, or our God expects anything otherwise. Remembering that can be a source of healing itself. Shabbat Shalom.